Honest Abe. Paintings by Malka Zeldis. Words by Edith Cunhart. Honest Abe. Abraham Lincoln was born in Kentucky in a log cabin. His parents, Thomas and Nancy Lincoln, were poor. His father worked hard as a carpenter and farmer, and his mother helped him in the fields. Neither his mother nor father could read or write. Abraham had an older sister named Sarah. When he was old enough to go to school, he and Sarah walked 2 miles to the one-room schoolhouse. Children from every grade sat in the same room. All the schooling Abraham Lincoln ever had added up to 1 year. But he was eager to learn, and he taught himself. When Abraham was 7, the family moved 100 miles away to Indiana. They packed up everything they owned on 2 horses and traveled through the wilderness. There were wolves and bears in the woods they had to cross. The first year they were in India, Abraham helped his father build a cabin. It had 1 room and a dirt floor. When it was finished, Abraham slept up in the loft. His mattress was a pile of dry leaves. 2 years later, Abraham's mother died. Abraham played with his cousin Dennis, who had come to live with them, but nothing was the same. Another year went by, and Thomas Lincoln left Abraham and Sarah and Dennis alone in the cabin and went back to Kentucky. Weeks later, he returned with a new wife. Her name was also Sarah, but Thomas called her Sally. She brought with her 3 children and all her furniture from her old home. Abraham loved Sally, and she loved him. She got Thomas to put a wooden floor in the cabin and to fix the leaky roof. Now 8 people lived in 1 room. Sally helped Abraham to study at night. He read by firelight. He borrowed books and newspapers. He read about George Washington. He read the Bible. He wrote poems. He taught himself. Abraham was growing strong and tall. His father hired him out to other farmers for 25 cents a day. He chopped down trees for firewood and split logs to make rail fences. He was a very good worker. Sometimes he jumped up on a tree stump and told funny stories and jokes. People loved listening to him. Abraham almost always had a book in his pocket or in his hand. He even carried a book with him when he plowed the field. He would read while his horse was resting at the end of a corn row. When he was 19 years old, Abraham was 6 feet 4 inches tall. He weighed more than 200 pounds and was a powerful wrestler and a swift runner. Abraham worked on a flatboat on the Mississippi River. Flatboats carried hogs and corn to market. The boat traveled down the river to New Orleans. There Abraham saw slaves. These black people did not get paid for the work they did. White people owned them and could sell them. Abraham thought this was wrong. Soon after Abraham got back from New Orleans, Thomas Lincoln moved his family to Illinois. And soon after that, Abraham left home. He moved to New Salem, a small town in Illinois, where he worked in a store. After a while, people began to come to the store just to hear Abraham tell stories. People called him Abe or Honest Abe. Once a woman paid him 6.25 cents too much. He walked 3 miles to find her and pay her back. Abe had many jobs in New Salem. He was a postmaster, delivered mail, and surveyed land. Abe liked visiting courthouses and hearing the lawyers' arguments. Many people came to him for advice. He decided to become a lawyer himself. He studied hard, he worked at night, and in 3 years he became a lawyer. Abe moved to Springfield, Illinois, where he met Mary Todd. Mary was 21 years old. Abe was 30. Mary was popular. She liked dancing and spoke French. Abe and Mary were married. Abe wore a tall silk hat in which he kept bills, notes, and legal papers. Sometimes, when he took off his hat, the papers fell on the ground. Abe's office was in Springfield. but he also rode to small towns far out on the prairie to help decide legal cases. He made many friends. He ran for Congress and was elected. Years later, Abe decided to run for the United States Senate. He ran against Stephen A. Douglas. Douglas believed that slavery should continue. Lincoln believed that slavery should end. Lincoln and Douglas traveled all over Illinois debating each other. When the people voted, Douglas won, but the debates made Lincoln famous. Lincoln and Douglas ran against each other again 2 years later. This time, the contest was for the presidency of the United States, and Lincoln won. Abe, Mary, and their 3 sons moved into the White House in Washington, D.C. The boys loved the old house. They played in the attic, rode their pony on the lawn, and chased their goats through the halls. Soon after Abraham Lincoln became president, the Civil War started. It was a war between the people who lived in the northern states, most of whom believed slavery should end, and the people who lived in the southern states, most of whom believed slavery should continue. Thousands of soldiers had been killed in the war, and the South seemed to be winning. In addition, Willie, the president's 11-year-old son, died. It was at this difficult time that Lincoln wrote the Emancipation Proclamation. This was a milestone on the road to the final end of slavery. 2 years later, the 13th Amendment to the Constitution outlawed slavery in the United States forever. The war continued. A terrible battle took place at the little town of Gettysburg, Pennsylvania. Thousands of soldiers were killed there. 4 months later, President Lincoln went to the battlefield to dedicate a cemetery to those who had died. The speech he made, known as the Gettysburg Address, lasted only about 2 minutes, but remains one of the most famous speeches in American history. He said that no one would ever forget the brave men who had died there, and that government of the people, by the people, for the people, shall not perish from the earth. The war ended after almost 4 years. "I've never been so happy in my life," the president said. 5 days later, President and Mrs. Lincoln went to the theater. As they watched the play, a man who was furious at the president for freeing the slaves crept up behind him and shot him in the head. The bullet went into his brain. President Lincoln remained unconscious through the night. In the morning, he died. His body lay in a coffin in the White House, and many people cried. A train took President Lincoln's body on the long trip back to Illinois. Thousands of people stood by the tracks to say goodbye. He was given a funeral in 10 different cities along the way. Finally, the train reached Springfield, where he was buried. Honest Abe was home.